Creekmore Chapter 14. I visit a grave and receive a letter from an old friend. I didn't want to tell Clyde about my powers with spirits. I was off to a new start and didn't want folks thinking of me as the boy with strange powers. Being the boy with the dangerous past was good enough for me. Ever since I knew Aunt Agnes didn't blame me for my mother's death, I was happy forgetting what folks used to say about me. But Clyde was awful blue. The anniversary of his father's death was coming up. He didn't have no desire to go sledding or take any interest in my stories about Walter Barnes. He was even getting cranky with Belton. "I'm tired of you," he yelled, his eyes wet with angry tears. Belton had rushed him after school as usual, but Clyde pushed him away. "You ain't a baby. Go home by yourself and leave me alone." "Why, Clyde, I ain't ever seen you like this." "I miss my pa," he said. "It's coming up on a year since he died." He wiped his tears with his arm, but he was still choking on his words. "Everything's harder now. My ma works all the time, and some of the men at the boarding house is awful mean when they drink. I wish he was back." Our classmates streamed past us, laughing and chasing each other home. I took Clyde aside and whispered, "I'll tell you what, I ain't never told you this 'cause it's cost me some trouble in the past, but I was born talking to spirits. Sometimes they come to me, and sometimes they don't. Maybe I could communicate with your pa's ghost." Clyde was pretty unsettled with the news. He looked at me like I said the sky was red, then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I could take you to his grave. Maybe he'd talk to you if I was there." I said I'd give it a try, so we set off to the far end of town where the church was. Behind it, nestled between two low hills, was the cemetery. You couldn't see it from the rows of cabins and boarding houses where we lived. I guess Mr. Newgate wanted it that way, for nearly all the men and boys buried there had died in accidents in the mines. Underneath the snow was rows and rows of grave markers, all of them small slabs of granite. Clyde dug through the snow to find his daddy's. "Here it is. The stone looks just like the day we buried him." I knelt down in the snow and covered the carving with my hands. Wainford Light, 1874 to 1905. The granite was rough and cold, for miners don't get a polished tombstone. I quieted my thoughts and listened hard. At first, all I could feel was Clyde's grief and my own desire to ease his suffering, but gradually I began to feel something different. It warn't nothing more than the feeling you have when a bird flies overhead, but it was there, hovering above us, the first spirit I ever really felt. I used to think it would be a frightening thing, to really know a spirit was with you, yearning to talk, but it warn't. My head beat steady and full, like it was growing inside my body, pushing out any other thoughts or feelings, so that I was all over listening, like how a wolf or a fox or a bobcat listens with its ears and tails, whiskers and fur. The spirit was sad and faint, and it didn't speak, but I put my own words to it. "Your pa's not restin' easy. He wishes he warn't dead so he could raise you in Belton and be company to your ma." "What else?" he asked. I tried conjuring the spirit. I asked it to tell me what to say, but it was gone. I warn't going to pretend otherwise. I couldn't take no joy out of deceiving Clyde. "Nothin'," I said. "I don't hear nothin' else." I don't know if it helped Clyde or not. He didn't talk as we walked home. Gusts of wind whipped the ends of our scarves and pulled at our jackets. Low-hanging clouds was collecting over the valley. "Looks like snow," I said. Clyde looked at the sky and nodded, but we was silent the rest of the way. All day folks waited for snow, but it never came. We woke up to clear roads and another dull sky heavy with clouds. Later in the day, Aunt Agnes had me hitch coppers to the wagon to pick up bags of flour and feed from the store. By the time I loaded the wagon, a heavy snow was falling. You could almost hear the flakes hitting the ground. Coppers didn't like it one bit. He didn't do more than twitch his ears when I told him giddy up, so I gave the whip a lazy crack. Just as I was about to flick it again, the manager leaned out the store with a letter in his hand. He was a fussy man who wore sleeve garters and an apron and kept his pencil sharp. "Hey, you forgot your mail, boy. Didn't even ask for it. You'd never know you had some if I didn't run after you." "No, sir," I called back. "I plumb forgot." I jumped out of the wagon so he didn't have to walk in the snow to hand it to me, but he wasn't done scolding me. I listened and apologized and thanked him for all I was worth until finally he gave me the letter. Well, my heart almost skipped a beat when I saw it, for it was from my old buddy Rufus. I tore open the envelope right then and there, and I would have stood there reading it, but the snow was almost as wet as rain and the ink began to run. I stuffed the letter in my pocket, then jumped back into the wagon and cracked the whip. This time Coppers roused himself and trotted home. "No," wrote Rufus, "the Robbers' Club wasn't meeting, and yes, Mr. Beadle was still a horror. Peggy did her best to slip him some extra helpings when he wasn't looking, and Walter Barnes had been sent off to the glass works. He was happy to leave the orphanage, and truth be told, the boys was happy to see him go, seeing how he was turning so bitter and mean. Things was getting almost pleasant in the dormitory, with folks getting along for the most part ever since he left. Your pa sent you a postcard, and I told Mrs. Beadle I'd send it along. I passed it around for the boys to look at, just like you used to do. Since there was a drawing of St. Nick on it, and it being the Christmas season, I didn't think you'd mind. I looked in the envelope, and there was a postcard of St. Nick holding up a tiny Christmas tree with a star on top. It was a fancy card with scalloped edges and a bit of sparkle in St. Nick's beard, and on the snow falling around him. The same words were there, this time in green ink. A card from your pa, hey? Aunt Agnes was stoking the fire, warming the house for Uncle Jim. He did the same thing to your mother, sent her a card every now and then so she couldn't forget him. I got my tin and showed her the other postcards he sent me over the years. She studied the pictures some, but overall didn't seem too interested. Her eyes glittered when she saw the broken necklace. Why, I remember the day your daddy gave this to May. He bought it in a jewelry store in San Francisco on his way home from Alaska. He said it came all the way from Italy and was made of Venetian glass. The blue beads made him think of her eyes. Let me see now. She held the strand up to my eyes. Yes, your eyes are the same color as May's. She handed the necklace back to me. It was all I had of my mother, and I was happy to know it linked us in this way. Her eyes and mine was the color of the beads, and if my father ever saw me, he would recognize I was his son. When I put them back in the tin, I thought of poor Clyde and how he was aching for a link to his pa. Snow fell off and on all week. One day it thawed and black slush lined the streets. Then it rained and froze again, so that all of Holly Glen was coated in ice. Drifts of snow was hard-edged and sharp, and all whole trees glistened like they was made of glass. Clyde's mood lifted with the sudden freeze. "Got news for you, Billy Creekmore," he yelled at me. I was so slippery we was skating to school on our shoes. "I'm off to the mine. Gonna start next week." The company was cutting his ma's wages since the boarding house was only half full. A half dozen of her boarders had sneaked off in the night without paying their rent and left the company in the hole. There was a rumor saying that they had gone to work in the Black Diamond mine 30 miles away, which was a bigger operation that paid better. So now my ma needs me to work since she can't make enough money to feed the three of us, and we still owe the hospital a lot of money. I'll be starting out as a trapper. "I'm awful envious, Clyde," I confessed. "It's an important job." On the morning of Clyde's first day, Uncle Jim walked him to the mine. His ma and Belton, Aunt Agnes, and I walked with them. Belton got all worked up seeing his brother go someplace other than school. He threw himself about, flapping his hands, then ran off trying to follow. Clyde shooed him away, but Belton kept running after him, throwing his arms around Clyde's waist and trying to drag him back towards school. I called after Belton, saying he could walk with me to school. Finally, his ma had to pick him up, kicking and screaming, since the opening to the mine warn't a safe place for Belton to wander about. Later on, when Miss Clark dismissed us, I saw Belton, pale and distraught, weaving between trees, waiting for Clyde to come out of the schoolhouse. "Come on, Belton," I said. "I'll take you to your brother. He's up at the mine. I'm going there now, too. Come on." But he wouldn't have it. He ran away from me, going back to his wandering till he met up with Clyde on his own, I guess. In general, school was awful lonely without Clyde. Whatever interest I had in my studies was gone. My mind wandered between lessons, and sometimes I felt I'd die if I had to go on listening to kids recite and the teacher lecture hour after hour. My only joy came at recess when the younger kids surrounded me, begging for stories about Walter Barnes and his pack of thieves. My old pal Rufus Twilly just wrote me saying how Walter and his gangs have built a whole set of tree houses joined by footbridges that's suspended in mid-air. They're fixed from one set of branches to another by ropes and special knots that only pirates and other types of rapscallions know how to make. This is where they hold folks for ransom, folks they've kidnapped at night by stealing into open windows and snatching them from their beds. Oh, my pal Rufus is in terrible danger, for if he tells a living soul, Walter Barnes is sure to cut his throat. But then again, if the gang's found out, he's off to the chain gang with the lot of 'em, maybe even the firing squad, for kidnapping's a capital offense. Seeing their eyes widen with terror was 1,000 times more fun than any geography or history lesson ever could be. All day my mind drifted in and out of lessons. I nodded at Miss Clark like I was paying attention, but all the while I was thinking about my next story, daring myself to spin an even more fantastic yarn about Walter Barnes.